The Watership Down Podcast is intended for listeners who are familiar with the plot. There will be spoilers. This episode is scripted, narrated, recorded and edited by Newell Fisher. Hello, and welcome to the Watership Down Podcast episode 219, in which we will be going through chapter 10 of the graphic novel, Hospitality. But first, I need to clarify one part of what I said in the last episode at one point, where I said, quote, Blackberry is more overt in his praise, saying they got through the common to this glorious meadow and that Hazel was right, end quote. I should have clarified that this happens in the graphic novel, not in the original, as it followed a reference to something Dandelion says in both. Next, long-time Asda member Sean Hakins has been in touch to point out a new YouTube reaction video on the 1978 film. Reaction videos are a guilty pleasure of mine, so I've always found it a shame that there aren't that many on the first film version of Watership Down. The one Sean has highlighted is from a channel called Awkward Ashleigh. Another favourite of mine is by SuzyLu Official. The links to both will be in the notes. Finally, I've become aware that there appear to be quite a few missing earlier episodes on the Spotify feed, and therefore from other feeds such as Apple and Audible. I was informed by Spotify, only after complaining, that their automatic review tools had determined that several episodes breached copyright. I appealed this immediately under fair use, and I was informed yesterday that the episodes will be restored, though at the time of recording, 11 AM GMT on Wednesday the 11th of February 2026, this appears not to have happened yet. The affected episodes are 5, 6, 8, 13, 15, 20, 22, 23, 25 and 30 to 32. I can only apologise to any of you listening to these earlier episodes. Please do let me know if any episodes disappear from the feed again, and I will also keep a careful eye out myself. In the meantime, the YouTube channel still has all the episodes, though this obviously isn't ideal for podcast listeners. Good old YouTube comes through again. I'm increasingly glad I used it as a backup method of listening to this podcast. Anyway, let's get back to the graphic novel, where our rabbit companions are about to receive some hospitality. The graphic novel, Chapter 10, Hospitality. Chapter 10 of the graphic novel has 12 pages and covers the last 9 basic pages or 7 3/4 full pages of Chapter 12 of the original novel, The Stranger in the Field, as well as the whole of Chapter 13, Hospitality, Chapter 14, Like Trees in November, Chapter 15, The Story of the King's Lettuce, Chapter 16, Silverweed, and the first 3 basic pages or 2 1/4 full pages of Chapter 17, The Shining Wire. The story of the King's Lettuce does not appear at all in this part of the story, though it does appear in a single half-page frame later in Chapter 20, but this is not being counted in this tally, meaning that this chapter compresses the plot by 57 basic pages or 52 full pages. This is the largest compression of the story in a single chapter so far, yet this is still the longest chapter in the graphic novel we have encountered to this point. It is raining. Hard. We see human boot prints on a muddy track, the impressions in the mud filling up with water. A drenched bee sits on a drooping poppy. The rabbits sit under the tree they have been digging under. Blackberry complains about the rain. Another of the group says they are tired. Sleeping above ground in rain can't be easy. Blackberry points out that Cowslip, who is named here for the first time, had come straight up to them, a group of complete strangers with no fear. It is obvious that a rabbit would normally never do this for fear of being attacked. Bigwig addresses the other side of this equation, adding that if Cowslip's warren had wanted to attack them, they would have done so by now. Blackberry says that resting rabbits belong underground. Another rabbit and Dandelion both agree. Hazel addresses Fiver directly, saying they are going against what he thinks they should do. There have clearly been conversations. In a rare moment in this telling of Watership Down, we are party to Hazel's thoughts as they approach the new warren, as, in the first thought bubble we have seen, Hazel asks Ashleigh that he be doing the right thing as they all approach the new warren. We see a large rabbit hole. Bigwig comments that they don't try to hide their presence, as it was easy to find. Hazel calls into the hole, and a smiling rabbit with spots on its face emerges and greets them. Hazel says that Cowslip offered them shelter. There is a pause. The smiling rabbit says they are all welcome. He introduces himself as Strawberry. We see human boot prints again in the mud. They look fresh. A person who is not familiar with the story might ask themselves why we are shown this at this point. As they all move down the run with Strawberry, Bigwig asks if they are going to see the Chief Rabbit. Hazel asks Strawberry, whose colouring is now more obvious, if Cowslip is Chief Rabbit. Strawberry's response is to ask Hazel if he is Chief Rabbit. With Bigwig running alongside them, Hazel's answer to this awkward question, despite the lack of the lost paragraph in this version, is that they had to leave their warren in a hurry, leaving their Chief Rabbit behind. Strawberry responds that they don't have a chief. Cowslip went to see them simply because it was his idea. Bigwig asks who decides about scouting and dealing with Ashleigh. The response is that the man who comes through keeps Ashleigh away. He adds with a smile that he shot a homba and an owl. Hazel starts to ask where, but is interrupted by Strawberry, who adds that they won't have to dig as if they have lots of burrows and plenty of food. Again, Hazel asks where they get there, and is interrupted again as Strawberry says they must be relieved to be out of the rain. Yet again, Hazel asks where, and they arrive in a huge burrow, which no one comments upon. We just see the guests looking around them from a distance. Strawberry tells them to settle into any burrow they like. It is later. We see tree roots framing the entrances to two burrows. Hazel dozes next to another rabbit, who is probably Acorn. Fiver sits near them. His eyes are wide open. Acorn, half asleep, says he never dreamed they'd reach a place like this. Fiver looks at him. Acorn adds that this is a fine place. Fiver looks around him. He looks the other way. He is not going to be sleeping any time soon. We see that at some point later on, Fiver has gone. Hazel looks up, awake, and calls his name. He gets up and starts looking for him. Finding Strawberry, he asks him if he has seen Fiver. Strawberry's response is that the man has come. He says to follow him as they should all SuzyLu. Hazel says he needs to find, but is interrupted again by Strawberry's enthusiastic urging. Strawberry says to fetch everyone and he will show them. He looks very happy and excited. We are outside now. The guests are standing by a huge pile of lettuces and carrots. Pipkin says he has never tasted carrot before. The delighted Strawberry tells them there is flavour there every day when the weather is bad. He adds to help themselves, which they do. We see the group contentedly gorging themselves on flavour. Above them, in a true moment of comic book convention, the words gobble, slurp, chew appear in large red letters, surrounded by shapes resembling lettuce leaves that almost suggest food is being consumed so enthusiastically that it is flying through the air. Hazel looks up, a lettuce leaf still in his mouth, as the words for their feeding become more subdued to a mere chew, chew, crunch, crunch in a collective speech bubble. Acorn comments that he cannot believe they wanted to go back. Bigwig adds that he now understands why the rabbits here are so large with all this food. Acorn adds that they almost didn't listen to Hazel and that it won't happen again. But Hazel has something on his mind. He asks Bigwig if anyone has seen Fiver, but Bigwig just makes a contented feeding sound. Hazel approaches Cowslip and begins to ask him if he has seen Fiver, but he is interrupted by a question in return as to whether Hazel has tried carrying food. It is a useful skill to learn, apparently, even if unusual for rabbits. Hazel just stares back at Cowslip's smiling, narrow-eyed face. We see Fiver sitting among the roots of a yew tree, staring into the distance. Hazel approaches him and asks if he's been out all night. Fiver comments on the food carrying, saying they are like dogs with sticks. He wants no part of it. Hazel responds that this place is amazing. For the first time, Fiver looks towards him, asking Hazel if he thinks the man puts food out of kindness. Hazel says he doesn't know why men do anything, adding that if he wanted to shoot rabbits he would have done so by now. Fiver now looks directly at Hazel and says that despite everyone thinking he's mad, there is something twisted about this place. He adds that he can't see it clearly, as if looking through a mist. Hazel points out that it's starting to rain again. It is a hint that Fiver picks up on. Looking away from Hazel again, he despairs, saying that Hazel knows he isn't crazy, but still won't listen. Hazel moves past this, telling Fiver not to torture himself, and that they should go back and enjoy their good fortune. It is a politician's answer, and Fiver just looks sad. We see a burrow entrance in the rain, a thin stream of water running into it. It seems some kind of metaphor. Back in the great burrow, to which we have still not been introduced, Cowslip, the chief that this warren doesn't have, is holding forth, welcoming their new guests, and quoting an old rabbit saying about warrens having more stories than passages. Here, strangely, Richard Adams' own words as narrator are given to Cowslip, and yet the exchange that follows seems to indicate that any stories the guests have to tell are the last thing he wants to hear. Is the implication that they have stories of their own that we don't know, that we never get to hear, or that they find some tales of El unacceptable? At first he enthusiastically mentions that the new rabbits have a great teller of tales among them. They agree, saying Dandelion is the fastest among them and a great storyteller. Dandelion's first suggestion is to tell of their journey to this place and the dangers they have faced. We see Cowslip. His smile has disappeared. He asks if they have any other stories. Dandelion suggests the tale of Erachara and the King's Lettuce. We see him with his ears down as he tries to sell the idea, but we sense the look from Cowslip, then see it. In a parallel universe, the one in which the novel is set, the idea is accepted by Cowslip, who even says they will enjoy it, but not here. His unsmiling face is broken by the simple statement that they don't tell those quaint old stories anymore. So which ones do they tell? Dandelion objects that those stories have been told by rabbits for generations. A rabbit that in the novel is Buckthorn adds that Elachara is a trickster, and rabbits will always need tricks. Cowslip disagrees. At this point, the seasoned Watership Down fan might expect Cowslip to produce the poet Silverweed, but no. With a fellow rabbit of this warren smiling at him in a way you might expect to see in a cult, he says that rabbits need dignity and the will to accept their fate. And that is all that it takes for Fiver to bolt. With the word written in large red letters in the air above him, in a wonderful comic book moment, he turns and runs. Hazel, his eyes wide in panic, shouts his name in a speech bubble with jagged edges. Another rabbit shouts "Ow" in a similar speech bubble as Fiver barges past him. Around them we see general panic and alarm at this completely unexpected moment. Two large rabbits of this warren try to stop Fiver, telling him to calm down, but we can see the whites of his eyes. Fiver bites the rabbit in his path in the shoulder, hard, injuring him, and is gone. Hazel tries to apologise. He says there is no excuse after the hospitality they have received, adding that Fiver is sensitive and has strange feelings sometimes. He says he will find Fiver and talk some sense into him. Bigwig, looking angry, says he is going as well, to teach Fiver some manners. Comparison with the book. This chapter, despite its length, is a very much summarised version of the time spent in Cowslip's warren in the original story. At the end of the previous chapter in the novel, the whole group discuss whether they should go to the new warren, and during this discussion Fiver states his view simply, that they should have nothing to do with the place. Here the discussion is moved to the start of the following chapter, and whatever view Fiver has expressed to the group, if any, we do not hear. Hazel just acknowledges his opinion. On arriving at the new warren, we meet Strawberry, who has a brief conversation with the group as they make their way to the Great Burrow, during which we get the first examples of the reluctance to answer any questions beginning "where," these being moved from the tour he gives Hazel in the original novel. We will encounter Strawberry briefly later on in this chapter. And then, when they arrive at the Great Burrow, there is no reaction from the Sandalford rabbits at this marvel of lapine architecture, apart from a distant view of them looking around them. If the rabbits are offered tours of the warren, we do not see them. It is during these that Acorn makes his positive comments in the novel. There is no return to Strawberry in the Great Burrow. His doe Nil Drohane, if she exists here, does not appear. And Hazel is not shown any shapes, as he has no tour of the warren, during which Strawberry's reluctance to answer where questions becomes apparent in the novel. In the novel, Fiver is practically forced underground by Hazel and Bigwig after an extended absence, during which it becomes even more clear that the rabbits of this warren don't answer where questions, as Hazel tries to find him. Here, Hazel notices his absence straight away, and after the distraction of the Flayra, uses gentler persuasion to get him back underground. At which point we encounter a much truncated version of the gathering from the novel, in which, just to remind us, an entire tale of El Hurra is told, which Cowslip makes it clear is not acceptable here. In the novel, the tale is followed, after some awkwardness, by the creepy poet Silverweed reciting one of his poems of acceptance of death. And it is this poem that drives Fiver into an existential panic, during which he scratches a tuft of fur from a large rabbit that is in his way. In this version, all it takes to panic Fiver is a simple statement from Cowslip about dignity and the will to accept their fate. And Fiver's reaction includes actually biting a rabbit that deliberately gets in his way. In the heavily summarised version of this scene in the 1978 film, Fiver just says he's had enough after Cowslip quotes a few lines from an unnamed Silverweed. But that is still more convincing than this scene, in which, I have to say, I'm not convinced by Fiver's reaction. In the novel, Cowslip's statement about fate is made as an opening line by Silverweed, after which Fiver asks Hazel to come closer to the poet with him so he can get a better idea of him. And it is only after the full poem is recited that Fiver bolts, after recovering from the trance Silverweed has put him in. Overall then, the compression of the plot here is not as extreme as in the 1978 film, as it is clear that they spend at least one night at Cowslip's warren, as opposed to the 2 nights of the novel. These nights being made clear in my Kindle edition on pages 72 and 93. In the 1978 version, it is not clear if they spend even a single night there. But in the time they do spend there in this version, I'm not convinced that the true strangeness of this warren has been adequately portrayed, as it very clearly is in the 1978 film, even without such factors as the shapes and Silverweed being present. I would have liked this element of strangeness to have been pushed a little bit further in this version, as, by the time it comes to Fiver's bolting outside, I found myself unconvinced that he has been given sufficient motivation for such a visceral reaction. And this was not simply due to the brevity with which Cowslip's warren has been portrayed. In comparison, Richard Breyer's Fiver just saying, "I've had enough," in a 1978 film seems, if anything, a bit of an underreaction. However, all the above said, Fiver has now left this dreadful warren, and will not return unless we count during the impending emergency. The scene is now set for the terrifying conclusion of the first part of Watership Down. Next time, we meet the Shining Wire.